spinning from whatever you did the last hour? Okay, and then, how many of you went to the movie last night? Okay, maybe a third of you. That was potent stuff. I mean, I just went home mad. I think we're supposed to be mad. There are injustices in this world that should make us mad. So thanks for coming here. My name is Linda Adams. I'm the Director of International Childcare Ministries. And I want us to have a chance to look at the reality that is in the world today. And like I said, it made me mad last night. And the fact that we're helping 20,000 kids felt like that much. I wanted to say, I want 40,000. 20 is not enough. But we have to start somewhere. And what we're having during this hour is the opportunity to say, how could I help just one and make a change in that child's future. So International Childcare Ministries is the child sponsorship program of the Free Methodist Church. So about 93% of Free Methodists live in the rest of the world, and 7% live here in the U.S. So this is a partnership among global Free Methodists, and they're in the developing world, most of them, and in places where the needs of children are profound, starting off with food and protection, and going up from there, education and so on. I have a video clip to use this morning. I'll tell you this. I first started this job 3.5 years ago in 2008. And I first went to Haiti quickly because 42% of our work in the world is in Haiti. And then I went to India. And I was blown away. I couldn't get over India. The contrast between light and dark, between the population as a whole and the Christian ministries was just unbelievable. And the plight of children just broke my heart. But I was so encouraged by what I saw that International Childcare Ministries is doing for kids in India. So I came home and I kept telling my staff, you just can't imagine, you just can't imagine. Well, about 2 weeks later, Slumdog Millionaire came out. And it took Best Picture that year. And I took my whole staff to the movie theater, right in the middle of the daytime. I paid for them to go. I said, you need to see exactly what we're doing, because in a few minutes you're going to see a place in this movie that's recorded under an overpass. That's 1 block from our Free Methodist Church in Andheri, where we have an outreach to street kids. And so I need to warn you that this video clip is pretty intense, but in the interest of allowing ourselves to have our eyes opened and our hearts broken and our passion inflamed, we're going to watch. So this is about 10 minutes, and let's see if we can make the things that adults will do to children because they can are almost unthinkable to us. The last line that you couldn't quite read was the older brother saying to the younger brother after he let go of Latika's hand, it should be okay. I love it that this clip shows some plucky little guys who did what they could to get away. And it's a good movie. But what we saw last night and what we are considering all day today is that there are millions of kids who are enslaved by other people for nefarious purposes. The verse that Jesus said in Matthew 18:6 just comes to me over and over again. If you cause one of these little ones who trust in me to sin, to stumble, if you harm one of these little children and make them lose their innocence, their trust, you'd be better off with a millstone around your neck and be drowned at the depths of the sea. Because God sees it all. Sometimes it just blows me away. Watching that movie last night and thinking, there isn't one of these situations that God is not aware of. He sees. And those of us who cry out, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We look at things like this and we say, there are plenty of things being done that are clearly not God's will. What does he want us to do about it? So I'm going to take the last half hour now to show you one hopeful and helpful thing that we can do about it. Sometimes it's overwhelming. The statistics are numbing. The realities of how widespread human trafficking is can make us feel like there's nothing we can do, we might as well throw up our hands. But I'm here to say that I know one thing that everyone can do. And so let's just talk about a hopeful solution, one among many. You see these kids? These kids are in a daycare center that's about the size of this room at the Andheri Free Methodist Church, about 1 block from where the flyover, they call overpasses flyovers in India, and I like that better. 1 block from where that movie was filmed. These are the kids whose lives are about the same reality. The kids come from a tribe and a people group called Party, and when they live out in the villages, they've historically made their living, the fathers have, by catching birds and selling them. They're bird catching. That's their place in Indian culture and society. That's their destiny. But these tribal people have been moving to the big cities in large numbers, and then when they get there, they have nothing to do but beg or steal. And the fathers are mostly now alcoholics and separated from the moms and kids, and the moms and kids are living on the streets. So the kids get by with whatever garbage they can find to eat. They have no bath, no bed, no shelter as they sleep. Some people in the Andheri church started to take notice and have compassion, started to bring them in, but the problem is the kids have such terrible cases of head lice that they didn't want to bring them in with the other kids because they would all get it. So they started a center like this where they could first teach them about Jesus, give them a meal, then they got a cistern and fill it so that it could get rainwater because these kids never had a bath. And they got a bath and they started dealing with the lice. Pretty soon they said, without an address or a birth certificate, these kids can't go to school. What could we do? And so they started some informal educational opportunities for those kids to learn to read and write, along with Bible stories and songs and what we would think of as Sunday school activities. Within a few weeks, the moms started showing up kind of sheepishly. They were so amazed that somebody was pouring positive attention into their children. They said, could we just stand in the back of the room and watch? Because the kids had come home, and started singing those songs and praying before they ate a bite of food. And the moms wanted in on it. So pretty soon they started a literacy program for the moms. And they purchased sewing machines to teach them how to sew. And they started enrolling some of those kids one at a time in school, because an education is your only hope out of the place where these kids live. So I was able to cut the ribbon on the grand opening of this daycare center. Do the kids look familiar? I think they might have been extras in the movie. But they're learning about the God who created them and who loves them. And now I want to tell you about most of the ministry we have in India, which is children, about 1,200 of them, living in 11 hostels. A hostel is not a boarding school because the kids go to government schools. But a hostel is a Christian home where the children receive meals, loving care, they have a shelter, they have protection and provision. Most of the kids are in desperate need of protection and provision because they're so vulnerable. What were some of the factors that made those kids in Slumdog vulnerable to the exploiters from the Hope Orphanage? Did you notice on the side of the bus, Hope Orphanage, in English? What were some of the factors that made those kids so vulnerable? Yeah. They were alone, no adult around. And in fact, you couldn't know this if you didn't see the whole movie, but they were orphaned. And so they had no parents. They had no father, nobody to stand up for them, okay? 20% of the kids in our hostels in India are orphans. But it's interesting because, there they gave us our acronym, our ICCM there, International Childcare Ministries. They define orphan differently than we do. I found out since I started this job 3.5 years ago that around the world and in the Bible, the definition of orphan is different than ours. I always thought when the Bible talks about widows and orphans, that's 2 separate groups. But no, that's just fatherless families. That's households without a man. Because in most of the world, a woman cannot feed her children. If she has no man around, she's helpless really, and so she starts to find a way to keep them alive. And that's where some of those desperate things that we read about happen, because people will do whatever it takes to keep their kids alive. Girls especially find it a wonderful privilege. I want to go back to the girls. I got some kind of auto advance. Aren't they beautiful? Girls especially find it a wonderful privilege to come to a hostel because they have a sponsor who will then pay for them to be in the hostel and to go to school. Girls in India, as in most parts of the developing world, are way at the bottom in terms of access to education. And one of our workers in India explained it to me this way. You can't afford to send all your kids to school. And you need your girl to help you around the house. But also there's the economic reality that if you invest in this girl by giving her her share of the food when food is scarce, so that she'll be healthy and strong. And by the way, the stats for girls in India dying of starvation under the age of 5 are just unbelievable. If you give her her share of the food, and if you pay for her school fees and those expenses that it takes to put her in school, you're just investing in someone who's going to leave you. Because when she's 13 to 15 years old, she's going to marry somebody else, and then she's going to go live and serve her in-laws. So if you invest in a girl, you're throwing your money away. But if you invest in your son, and he gets a good education, then he'll be able to support you in your old age. And he'll have a wife, and she'll serve you. And so the economic reality makes discrimination against girls just logical. People make those choices. We also sometimes sponsor pastors' children and church planters' children. And I asked the bishop once, because I gave him permission to give us 100 applications, and it came in and it was 97 boys and 3 girls. I said, who made that decision? He said, 100 people made that decision. We allowed every pastor to choose one child, and all the pastors who had a son chose their son. And the 3 pastors who didn't have any sons chose their daughters. So I said, well, what can we do about that? I said, well, what if we say you could have 2 kids sponsored if the second one is a girl? He said, yes, we'll do that, and we'll also say that all girls will get preferential treatment in the application process. So I said, okay, let's try to change that imbalance a bit. These kids are at a hostel down in the south of India. Do you remember the tsunami a few years ago that was, Sri Lanka and South India? Well, we were able to build 2 hostels for some of the thousands of orphans who were created by the tsunami. But over the next few years, the government eventually mandated that those children should all go live with extended families somewhere else. And so we had 2 empty hostel buildings. And somebody said, I know what. There are thousands of the people from Tamil Nadu who have actually migrated to Mumbai, and they are rag pickers. That means scavengers at the dump site, right? And those rag pickers have children who are never going to get a chance to go to school. And besides that, they speak Tamil. So if they go to school in Mumbai, they won't speak the language. So how about if we have some of those kids come down where their relatives and ancestors have lived, where they speak the language, and live in the hostel during the school terms, and then go home on vacation, and they'll be able to speak the language in the local school. And so these are 2 of those beautiful children who have a chance to do it that way. This boy is Ganesh. Anybody recognize that name, Ganesh? It's the name of a Hindu god. He was brought into the hostel, and this man, Nayan, who's our child development coordinator there, was walking down the hall at 10:30 at night, and he caught Ganesh in the act of reading his Bible when he should have been in bed. And he said, what are you doing out here at 10:30 at night? You should be in bed. And he said, I know, but I've fallen in love with God, and I can't stop reading his book. This man is one of many who have come to me to tell me that they came to the hostel having no idea who Jesus was, but they were loved. They saw good Christian parenting, role modeling. They had family with the other kids in the hostel. They got to know Jesus, and now they have been called to be pastors, and this man is now a pastor in the Free Methodist Church in India. I mentioned that we do sponsor some pastors' kids there, and I asked one of the bishops once, well, why would we do that? Because I'm worried that A, it might create a dependency mentality in those pastors, if they take handouts like that, or B, maybe the congregation would be discouraged from tithing because the pastor has another source of income. There's a few problems we've seen with this model. And the bishop said to me, what you're calling a pastor, I'm actually calling a church planting, cross-cultural missionary. And he said they go up into these remote villages where nobody knows the name of Jesus, and they begin to talk about Jesus, and they collect up a group of people, and as soon as they start having Bible studies and gatherings in somebody's home, they do teach the people about giving 10% to God. But their tithes might be an egg and a handful of rice, and you can't pay your kids' school fees with eggs and rice. So the children's school fees is the only cash item in the pastor's family budget. So if an outsider will just pay for that, the children will not have to sacrifice in education because their parents are missionaries. We also have funded Vacation Bible School, and the Spring Arbor Church here raised money in their own Vacation Bible School a couple of years ago so that these little rural villages could have Bible school. This woman on the left, Sushila, is the one who started the program. That particular year, a couple years ago, we had 12,500 kids in Bible school, 800 trained young adults to go out, fan out all over the interior to have these Bible schools, and the whole program costs us $12,000 a year. You know what, I'm not a mathematician, but I can say that works out to just about $1 a kid, and I'll do that any day. This is Bishop John Golapalli and Tiva. I'm going to tell you something about Bishop John. Oops, back we go. Bishop John was one of those kids who was orphaned at the age of 7, meaning his dad died. And in India, if a woman wants to get remarried, a young widow wants to get remarried, she's pretty much forced to give her children away to relatives because no man will marry a woman with extra mouths to feed, at least in some layers of society. And so John and his siblings were in the act of being given away, but he had one Christian aunt, and she asked, could I take him and find a home for him? And his mother agreed. So she took him to not a Free Methodist, but a Christian missionary couple. And they were getting on in years, and they had never had children, and they had started calling each other Zechariah and Elizabeth. And they were praying for their baby John. And somebody showed up on the doorstep with this 7-year-old and said, would you please raise him? And something in their hearts quickened, and they said, this is our John. So they named him John, and they raised him. And he was a brilliant and winsome Christian. He married Tiva, went off to Bible school. They had 3 kids, and then somebody showed up on their doorstep with a baby orphan, wanting them to take the orphan in. And he said, we can't do that. We don't have 2 rupees to rub together. And he heard the voice of the Lord say, take this child and nurse him for me, and I will pay your wages. Does anybody know where in the Bible that quote comes from? It's when Moses was a baby and Pharaoh's daughter had taken him out of the water, and then Miriam says, do you need a nurse for this? And then she runs and gives Moses his own mother. And it's really one of the funniest sentences in the Bible, because Moses' mother comes back, Pharaoh hands the child to his own mother and says, take this child and nurse him for me and I will pay your wages. So now, Pharaoh's money, by the way, where does Pharaoh's daughter get her money? From dad, right? Pharaoh's money is being used to raise this very child that he declared should die. But we'll get to that later. So Bishop and Tiva took this child in. And then another one showed up, and another, and another, and another, until they had 35 kids in their care before they institutionalized. By the time they came along and joined the Free Methodist Church, they had thousands of children, vulnerable children, living in protective care and being educated through their ministries called Count. I said one of the questions I would try to answer during this session would be, why would a parent ever sell their own child? Desperate people do desperate things. Here's one example I've heard. A family has 6 children. All 8 of them are starving. They're literally starving. And in fact, 48% of children in India have their bodies and brains stunted from not enough calories in their first 3 years of life. That's half. You're starving. Somebody comes along and says, I'll buy the 10-year-old boy for $50. And I'll take that child and he'll work in a brick kiln and I'll feed him. And he'll do fine. That's a trade. That's an honorable trade. And you think, well, that $50 will hold us over for a while until I can figure out the next trick to keep my family alive. And so you hope for the best and say, well, he's a big boy, and you send him off. It's unbelievable the kinds of choices that people are forced to make in extreme poverty. Now these pictures are just going to continue advancing on their own. These are from some of the 30 countries where we work. I think you'll see the difference between the bright eyes of some children who are in a program that's providing them with love and food and the knowledge of who they are in Christ. And then some of the other kids that I just took their photo from the car window. This little girl is in the Philippines. We have a tremendous ministry there called the Ahon Ministry. It's in the city dump where many families live. And when I was in that dump, where we've got about 60 or 80 sponsored kids, and they have an after-school program, and it's just a wonderful thing. One of the moms came up to me when she found out I was the director of the program, and she said, before Pastora Tessie came here and started this ministry with our kids, we were lost without Jesus in our hearts. We were not married to our husbands, and our children were running the streets. But now, she said, we have Jesus in our hearts and worship in our homes. We had a big wedding where we all married our men. And now our children come home from their afternoon program with a song in their heart. And they're not running the streets. There's been total transformation. And what I love about it is it's still in the dump. They haven't moved. They're still there, and they're shining their bright lights among all the other families who scavenge for a living in the dump. I referred a little earlier to Jesus' words in Matthew 18, and really the whole 14 verses that begin that chapter tell us a lot about the value of children in the Bible, what Jesus has to say. In fact, Jesus, when they asked him, who's the greatest in your kingdom? He brought a little kid in and surprised them by saying, unless you even humble yourself like this child, you can't even get into my kingdom. And whoever becomes humble like this child is greatest in the kingdom. And then he goes on to say, if you welcome a little one in my name, or give him a cup of cold water, you're doing it for me. And then he says, you better protect them, because he said, if you cause one of these little ones who trust in me to sin, you'd be better off dead, like I mentioned earlier. He says also that you should never look down on them, and that in fact, if the Father in heaven is not willing that even one of them should be lost. So it's like if a guy had 100 sheep and one wandered off, go find that lost one and bring him home, because it's not the Father's will that even one of these children should be lost. I have to ask, is this world a safe place for kids? I think all day today we're going to have a resounding no. It's not a safe place for kids. But then I have to ask myself, has it ever been a safe place for kids? I mean, think of it. Pharaoh made that kind of an edict so that all the parents had to throw their babies in the Nile River. And in fact, baby Jesus, remember that? King Herod made a decree that all the baby boys under 2 years old should die. I mean, has it ever been a safe place for children? If the angel hadn't have caused Mary and Joseph to know that they should run off to Egypt, baby Jesus would have never grown up to be the Savior of the world. The children are vulnerable. They need the protection of adults. And God expected in the Old Testament that his people would express his passionate concern for the least, for the foreigners, the strangers. Remember, he said, leave the corners of your fields so that those refugees who are wandering through can have something to eat. And then one time, God called himself a she-bear robbed of her cubs. Is there any more dangerous place in the world than between a mother animal and her babies? And God's anger, he was threatening to come after his own people with his teeth and claws bared, because they did not protect the little ones, because they did not share their bread with the hungry, because they were self-centered and ingrown. And he said, I am the father to the fatherless. That means that you, my people, should take that role. What do fathers do for children? They provide, they protect, they love, they teach them in the way to go. And so he's inviting his people always to take that role with children. Welcoming a little child in Jesus' name. Jesus said that if we do that, we're welcoming him. And so I've just come to think of sponsoring a child as a way of welcoming. You might never meet the child. Hopefully you'll write letters and they'll write letters. It's not a flawless system. Sometimes it takes longer than we wish. Sometimes the letters come back with bad news. But it's a connection. And I believe that children who have a connection with somebody outside their own little world start to have a greater sense of hope for their own future, because they realize that somebody's investing in them. Somebody's praying for them, and they pray for us too. And so that connection is a way of connecting them with God's people beyond their local setting. Just want to end with this thought. Back to baby Moses and Pharaoh. I've begun to think of child sponsorship as a basket. Pharaoh's daughter, when she saw one child floating downstream to where she stood, could have been fairly depressed about the fact that her father made all those Israelite slaves throw their babies in the river. I mean, she might have disagreed with that. She might have wished she could do something about that, but all of a sudden there's one child floating along, and she had a choice she could make. She could have obeyed her father and taken that basket and flipped it over, because her dad had declared that all those Israelite baby boys should die, and she knew this was an illegal baby. She could have done that. Or she could have just gone, uh-oh, this is a hot potato, I'm not touching this one. It's not my problem, it's not my baby, just keep taking my bath and let that one float downstream and whatever happens, happens. Or she could have done what she did, which is to take that child and then to say, I'm high and dry on this riverbank and I've got resources to spare. I'll do what I can for this one. Then you have that amazing story about how Miriam runs and gets her mom, and then she says, take the child and nurse him for me. And then that's just pretty funny, because Moses grows up in Pharaoh's house, right under his own nose. He's eating Pharaoh's food. He's going to school at Pharaoh's school. And God is raising up a liberator for the slaves right under Pharaoh's nose. God had protected this child, and he brought Pharaoh's daughter into the conspiracy to save the children. And little did she know she was joining God's conspiracy, that one day Moses would say, let my people go. So how do we know which little baby's going to grow up to be God's great leader? I've had a privilege of meeting some bishops, a member of parliament, a lot of pastors, school directors, program directors for us who used to be sponsored kids. And it's a thrill for me to see that some of them have grown up to be world changers, and we've invested in them. But when you look at a bunch of little kids, you can't tell which one is going to grow up to be great. So I think we have to save them all, don't we? So the privilege we have by sponsorship is to just do our part for one. $25 a month is a way of changing a child's life. Some college students have done it by taking those 10-cent bottle returns. Some have done it by sharing with each other. Some have said, you know, that's only 83 cents a day. I think I spend that much on a Coke every day. If I just gave up one Coke or one coffee, I would let this girl go to school. I could change her future. I was thinking of showing a little video clip that last time it didn't come up, and I'll just tell you. It's Kevin Austin from Not For Sale, and he says, sponsoring a child is a way of standing between a vulnerable child and her potential exploiter. And ICCM does that really well. So I just made Kevin's 3-minute video 10 seconds. And that'll give you a chance to ask 5 minutes worth of questions. Do you have some thoughts, observations, feelings, questions that we can share with each other for the next 5 minutes?
What's the water filter on the front table?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Well, we've had a partnership with Sawyer Water Filter. This costs $45, but we charge $50 because then we have some transportation costs to get them around the world. But this filter, which is pretty easy to transport and just requires them to have 2 buckets of their own, will provide a lifetime of clean water for a family. And it's pretty amazing because it doesn't take any chemicals or any power. You don't have to have any replacement filters. You just have to backwash it with this syringe every 100 or so uses. And so we've been mostly distributing them in Haiti because of the cholera epidemic. It's been a beautiful thing to be able to see that we can provide a cup of clean water in Jesus' name. And that's another thing that someone could do if you can't take on a long-term commitment to sponsor a child for many years, because that's just a little scary. You could buy a water filter for a family, and that gift would go on and on and on too. Thank you. You can do that. And I also have plenty of information here, and in fact some more DVDs, which I'll get out of my bag, because there's a DVD with about 10 clips on it. Diane, you've seen a lot firsthand.
I have, and if any of you haven't done your cross-cultural yet, I know I can tell you that we visit the 3 centers for ICCM in Cambodia. We also visit the ICCM centers in India. Not every country we go to has an ICCM center, but for those students who have chosen to get involved with childcare, it's been a real blessing to them. And because we go every year to Cambodia and every other year to India, it's possible for you to send gifts to your children with us. It's possible to meet your child if you're on your cross-cultural. And I see my 2 girls in Cambodia each time I visit, and when they see me, they run up and they yell, "Mommy!" and sit with me in church, and it's really wonderful.
Yes. I know that I kind of focused more on India today because of the Slumdog Millionaire clip, but also because our project last year, some of you heard about what we did with the Lahu tribal children in northern Thailand. And I can tell you now that that hostel has been completed and the children are all sponsored but 2. And we'll get those sponsors probably today, I hope. But that is a year old. But this year's Freedom Sunday project, which we just had Freedom Sunday last week, but it's called Stand for Children. And there are some statistics about India that are going to make you miserable here. But Stand for Children allows this man, Kanayan Mali, who's on the back here with his wife. He is our child development coordinator for the Alpha hostels in India. And already his job is to go around to the hostels and make sure that children's care is up to government standards, is healthy, that children are disciplined in the right way, that the children don't have any private complaints that they need to tell him, right? He's about children's rights in India. And now we're expanding his job. He's getting a computer and a projector and some curriculum so that he can educate children about the tactics of the traffickers and educate children so that they're not only wiser and a little more street smart themselves about the kinds of lures that are out there, but they can educate their peers. And he'll also be educating the church leaders and the hostel leaders and the children's parents so that it just takes what we already have, which is 1,200 kids in residential care, and it embeds a culture of abolitionism within that existing structure by expanding his job description. So when we receive this offering and any donations you wanted to give us for Project Stand for Children, it will help with his salary and travel and the expenses of bringing people together for those meetings. We'll probably have to have a meal, that's how it goes. So that's what Stand for Children is all about, and you're welcome to take any literature about that you would want. Yes, please take that. We gave one to everybody, but maybe some didn't get them on the way in, so they're right there. Okay, I think we have 1 more minute. Diane?
I just have one more thing to say at the information fair from 3 to 5. I've been asked to have a lot of stuff there, and one of the things I have are T-shirts from the ICCM centers in Cambodia, and we're selling them for $10. So if you bring $10, you can help. Not by sponsoring a child if you can't afford to do that, but you can help by buying a T-shirt.
Yeah. Cool.
Can
Yes.
you repeat that? I couldn't hear.
Okay. At 3 to 5 this afternoon in the fireside room at the church is the Next Steps Fair. And I'll be there with all this information and some children available. Well, not children, but just their folders, their pictures. But she said that they also have T-shirts from the House of Love, House of Joy, House of Peace in Cambodia. If you saw the movie last night, you know that the child sex trafficking in Cambodia will just make you want to puke. And so different futures for Cambodian kids are wonderful, and if you just buy a T-shirt for $10, you're helping the cause, and Diane will make sure that gets back to Cambodia. Okay. Yes?
A question about Cambodia. Why can't we just end it? If we're going to go over to Iraq, why don't we just do something? I mean, why wouldn't the U.S. just enter Cambodia? I mean, we can blow them up. Well, we're not going to do that, but I mean, why can't we make them?
So she's asking why don't we have political solutions? Why don't we have other solutions? And there has to be the will to that, and there has to be international cooperation, and there has to be what I appreciated, like when they gave the example last night of the man who was arrested in, was it Honduras or no? Guatemala. It was the Guatemalan police that needed to make that arrest, and working to educate, empower, and working through local law enforcement so that they enforce the laws that are already on their books seems to be the way to change it long term and not come swooping in with, bombs. You wanted to say something?
Well, I was going to say, yeah, I wish it was that simple, because so much of it, especially in places like India, has to do with culture, not with governance. In Indian culture, the vast majority of the population is Muslim, and then, or excuse me, is Hindu, and then the next largest minority is Muslim. Well, the Muslims help the poor, but only the poor Muslims. The Hindus, within Hindu theology, if I'm on the top of the rung of the ladder, I'm actually doing a disservice to the person at the bottom because I'm not letting them live out their karma so that in the next life they make some progress. There's no incentive for the people on the top to help the people on the bottom. I spent the month of January in India and went to Andheri and met all those people she's talking about. And the only people who are really doing something out of love and out of selflessness are the Christians.
And what percentage of the population is Christian?
About 6%.
6% out of 1.2 billion.
Yeah.
So there's a
Yeah,
job to do.
It's incredible. And the Muslim parents love it when their children can go to Christian schools like the one at the Andheri Church. So, you know, it's an open door for Christians, but it's illegal to proselytize, to evangelize. It's illegal in India. So it's just a real challenge all the way around. And so much of it has to do with culture and religious heritage.